Hassan, Assalamu alaikum and welcome to News in Focus.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I think let's look, for example, we'll start off globally and come back into the impact in terms of South Africa. So from an economic, from a market perspective, today the Aussie hit an all-time high of just over 100,000.
So you hit the 100,000
So
mark.
we find it that mental number or mental this thing, which was always the 100,000 mark, it closed
What
today.
was the reason
above.
for that reaction?
So I think it was just, you've seen even the S&P 500 yesterday hit an all-time high,
So
which is the
global
US market.
confidence.
So globally, you have seen stock markets across where US, UK, South Africa, and most major markets have had a very, very strong run over the last couple of weeks. Now, one would have thought, if we go back to April, when Donald Trump first announced those tariffs that he was going to implement and bring through across major countries, stock markets came under massive pressure for that few days. When he came out and he get guns blazing, he brought out his whole poster and he said, okay, this is the trade deficit between us and this country, and this is what we're going to implement. Markets were spooked and you saw markets came under massive pressure. But this time around, which now we know that 90-day pause has sort of finished off now, and now there's talk about 1st of August. I think you see markets are anticipating that it's more a negotiation tactic, and you are seeing it. For example, we saw Japan settle this morning or last night at a 15% tariff. So now, and guess what? Japan settling at 15% tariff is fantastic for Toyota. It's much better for Toyota than the American producers of Ford, GM, and those killer producers, because Ford, GM, and those countries, when they are importing steel and copper into the country, they're importing it at 50% because that's what Trump wants to implement on copper and steel coming into America. Toyota, producing steel in the country and maybe importing it from China, all they have to do is experience a 15% tariff on the completed product. That's why Toyota's shares was up 15% in the past 2 days. So I don't think Trump is also, and his advisors have thought through a lot of the impact in terms of the US consumer and the US economy. That's one thing. Second thing, there's a term going on at the moment. They're calling it taco. You know, taco, we think about taco as what you call is, the Mexican food that we eat or whatever. The reason they're talking about it, it says, the abbreviation is for Trump always chickens out. So that's what the market is saying, that Trump goes gung-ho when he's got his wind and sails are behind him. But as soon as he faces a bit of headwinds, like last time, remember in April, China gave him a headwind. China said, no problem, you come, we'll come. You come, we'll come. And they played that game and they continued until Trump had to slowly back off after that. And then he gave the 90-day pause. So they're saying this is a negotiation. So I think everybody is expecting that there will be an increase in tariffs. Nobody's not expecting that. Previously, America had implemented largely a 3% tariff on all goods, most goods coming into the country. People are expecting it'll settle anywhere between 10 to 15%. Majority of the major trading partners will be impacted by 10. Now, South Africa, on the other hand, he sent a letter last week to the president's office of the president, stating that so previously it said 34% in April. He said in this letter a 30% impact in terms of tariffs on all South African imports South African exports into the US. Now, I think you'll see in the next week or so, whether they will get a deal done or not, I don't know. But I think there's definitely behind the scenes something going on where South Africa may end up settling at between 15 or maybe 20%. And they will try and get a deal done somewhere around that. But the important things to note, of our exports, 8% of our total exports goes to the US. 50% of that is made up of minerals and materials. So largely particularly platinum PGM materials, iron ore, those type of materials are going into that. Those are still zero rated. So only the 4% of our exports, our total exports, is largely impacted. And the two key sectors that are largely impacted is the motor vehicle sector and the agricultural sector. Motor vehicles, because we're exporting a lot of our Mercedes-Benzes or BMWs are manufactured here, particularly certain lines, and are exported into the US. They will be impacted if that 30% tariff remains. And it is going to have an impact, particularly on the Eastern Cape, as Samuel highlighted earlier. The second point is the agricultural sector. And I think here there will be some potential changes, or there's definitely going to be some, I think both areas, but definitely there will be some impact also on the agriculture. And the reason being is, if you look at oranges, one good example, citrus, it's one of the big exports from South Africa into the US. South Africa is the second largest exporter of oranges in the world after Spain. If you look at them exporting to the US, they export to the US not in their season. So they're not effectively competing with US orange producers. They're only competing with other Southern Hemisphere players. So Chile and Peru is a big competitor of South Africa in terms of exports to the US for oranges. Now, Chile and Peru have already got a trade deal with the US of 10%. So they've already settled at that. South Africa at 30% is definitely at a disadvantage. So it will, but there is some flexibility in terms of what you call this exports of agriculture, but it's not going to happen overnight. So in this first year, in this season year, if there's no change in terms of that export of 30% tariff on oranges and citrus, South African exporters are going to be impacted quite significantly on the agriculture side, particularly the citrus side. But I think what will happen over time is that production or harvest going forward, more of it will now start to be allocated to other countries like India and China. Those are big consumers of also citrus products. I mean, I was talking to one of the citrus exporters in our country last week, and he's talking about now, all of a sudden, Indian demand for our oranges has shot up in the last few weeks. And they're seeing the opportunity, if these tariffs remain, that South Africa could be a good market for them to import our oranges into their country. So the shorter term, if it remains at 30%, agriculture and motor vehicles are the most impacted in the country. And therefore, particularly the Eastern Cape and other areas of the country on the agricultural side will be impacted in the shorter term. But I don't think we must be completely negative in terms of how this impact will be. I think it is a negotiation. You can see it. I don't know if that I saw sort of a news announcement earlier before I got into the studio where they said that the EU is now looking at settling at 15% tariffs with the US. After also the argy-bargy was going on and they were last minute, it looks like now they're also settling in at around 15%. So I think hopefully, inshallah, we'll probably also settle around the 15% mark if we sort of our negotiations work out correctly. It obviously has an impact, but not as bad as what a 30% impact can be. And that's where our concern is, particularly for those two sectors.
Hassan, thanks for your input. We will catch up with you shortly.
Sure.
You got another 5 minutes here to wrap up, Hassan.
Sure. So look, obviously in terms of from the tariffs impact, highlighted where the key issues are. Two sectors in particular will be impacted if it remains around the 30% mark. The feeling is that I think we will negotiate it. Hopefully, we'll get an opportunity to negotiate it lower and probably settle around the 15% level as well. In terms of South Africa, where we currently, if you look at the last few weeks or so, there's been company results coming out. There's been some economic updates. From the company results perspective, Mr. Price came out the other day. You had one or two of the other retailers, and there's been some of the banks and the like that also have been giving some update. In fact, Sasol also gave an update as well. The retailers are doing pretty okay. Things are tough, but they're doing still relatively well. They're still showing reasonable growth in terms of profitability, and they're still showing some top line growth. But the environment is tough. It's not free flowing. You've seen inflation numbers come out today. Came out at 3%. So 3% is still at the bottom end in terms of the range of 3 to 6%, which is highlighting that there's still no cause for concern in terms of inflationary impact coming through strongly, and therefore the potential to raise interest rates. Remember, the last decision we saw was that the Reserve Bank governor had cut rates to 7.25%. I think we probably they'll be on hold now for a period of time until there's a bit more clarity in terms of where we see inflation going through as well. But I think there are definitely challenges in certain sectors. I highlighted two of them. I think in terms of the public sector, and that's why, remember, we're seeing at the moment also there was public sector wage negotiations that took place. They settled at was it Transnet at way above inflation. Now, that is going to be putting a bit of pressure again in terms of the government finances and funding, and that remains one of the big challenges for us, still remains our ability to control our debt levels so that we can spend on more appropriate stuff. Now, we're dependent on SARS trying to recoup a bit more money to help us in terms of our budget deficit as well. Another key aspect, and it's playing out now with what's happened now with General Mkonazi and the like, is the issues around corruption and the like. I mean, just yesterday now, the 4 suspects arrested for DJ somebody's murder. But there was a politician one of the politicians that are sitting in the house of one of the suspects that's arrested. There's so much of interlink, and General Mkonazi had highlighted, and one of the key aspects he highlighted in his revelations was the talk about the drug cartels that are operating from Gauteng and how significant and substantial they are. Daily Maverick did a piece on it to talk about how big the cartels in terms of operating from South America, getting it into this country and being used to distribute it locally and offshore. That's just one aspect in terms of, unfortunately, the lawlessness has led to many mafia type of areas prevailing to many areas of this country. And that remains a challenge. But how this plays out in terms of General Mkonazi and this inquiry, it'll be interesting to see over the next couple of months. Auditor General highlighted one thing, and we've been talking about the Auditor General's focus on the municipalities and the like. She highlighted that in the last 5 years, she's recovered 4.5 billion rands in terms of some of the irregular expenditure that was this. But it's obviously still a drop in the ocean compared to. But the fact is, she's talking about wanting to go after more and more of the irregular expenditure and try and recover more of that. So hopefully we see more of that coming through. You've seen now also the suspension of one of the senior NPA prosecutors in Gauteng, Andre Chauke, that took place yesterday. This is the same person who Shamila Botoy 2 years ago had recommended that to be suspended. Only now, going back to the point of our current president also being sometimes too delayed and too, engaging with too many people before making decisions. 2 years to make a decision when your head of the NPA told you to go about and now only to do it was too long. So I think we're going into, a period of, there is going to be some volatility, both from a global perspective, but also locally, as things pan out with these inquiries and these things around the General Mkonazi and Senzo Mchunu, and then also some of the, senior prosecutors. There is going to be potentially, leading up to next year's elections on the local side, we are going to face a period of some increased volatility, I think, during that period.